Hey there. While everyone arrives, I am going to do a quick tech check because I am getting a different error that I can't share my screen. And if this continues, okay, let me try again. All right, I am going to try on a different browser. Unfortunately, this isn't something that it doesn't, I don't have this issue before the live. All right. We'll see if this works. Okay. Let me try this again. Can you guys hear me? All right, at least you can hear me. Hopefully I'll be able to share my screen on this other browser. Yeah, so this is only an issue with StreamYard. I share my screen all day. And last time it prompted me to change something, and I had to just reset Chrome, but I'm going to try that. If that doesn't work, we're hosed because I have to share my screen and we might need to reschedule for tomorrow night. Okay, don't go anywhere. I'm going to restart my browser and see if I can fix this issue. Okay, let me try this again. And now it works. So, okay. All right. I am, you know what? We are just going to jump in. Can you guys hear me? I see Jeanette said something about black and white stripes. So I'm assuming that you can. Let me just double check. Yes. Okay, great. Then I'm not going to stop sharing my screen. I'm just going to remove myself because I'm afraid of stopping. And now I need to, let's see. I have to open everything again. Okay. All right. Finally, gosh, I don't know why this has become a new issue, but we are just going to push past it. All right. So tonight was going to be a live Q&A, and we're going to push that to next week because I was searching for something else in the FOIA docs and came across something that I've noticed it before, but I was like, okay, that's I'll put that on my to-do list. But I started revisiting it just because I was curious. And it's just, well, before we get started, no, I'm not even going to go into this. Please, let's just focus on talking about the live. And also, I do most everything that I do for Tylee and Joe, obviously also for the rest of the victims, but I primarily work for an audience of 2, and I have this this petition out to get justice for Joe. So if you are so inclined to sign, you don't need to be a U.S. citizen. You can be from anywhere, but it's just bit.ly justice without the vowels for Joe. Okay, and we'll pick up the first Q&A next week. Okay, so let's first talk about what the FOIA docs tell us about Lori's movements the day that Charles was shot. And I am going to start with, I think this is it. Yes, so I pulled this from the FOIA docs and I will link to it. In fact, I forgot to share it, but I will share it. I'll add it to the presentation as soon as it's finished. And I'm not going to go through it here because I go through it on the map. But this is just an like a quick view at where this is coming from. This is coming from the Chandler Police Report, the 1100 plus page report. So it just kind of, was written out in kind of exposition form. And I went through and thought, okay, well, this isn't particularly interesting. So I started plotting it out just on a Google map, but then I didn't really like that format because there was a lot of junk in the trunk. So I created a custom map. But anyway, so first things first, why are we even able to trace Lori's movements? Well, the long and the short of it is Lori grabbed Charles' cell phone, and I already talked about in the live that I did about the 20 biggest surprises from the FOIA docs, about how there was this lost opportunity where Detective Yinklin from Chandler Police Department asked Lori where Charles' cell phone was, and Lori was like, "Oh, I found it in his car." And anyway, and I already talked about that, how that was just a big mess on Chandler's part, because the whole explanation, the whole reason Charles was shot, according to Lori's story, which I think is more fiction than fact, was that there was this big fight over his phone, and she had gotten a hold of his phone, and he came back, and they were like going back and forth. And so for her to just serendipitously find his phone when she took off in his car doesn't make any sense. Like, the only way it could have been in his car would have been for someone who had been in the house to then carry his phone out. So anyway, but when she opened up his phone, one of the things that she opened was Gmail, and Gmail had GPS tracking. So as long as she had his phone, uh, his Gmail app was tracking her GPS location. So, I've talked about this before. Lori just wasn't very tech savvy. None of these people were. They should have never thought that they could get away with crimes that involved any kind of digital devices. But that's how we were able to track their steps. So, so uh, that said, I'm not going to jump into that yet. We are going to look at the map. Okay, I'm going to pull this. Okay, so this is the map that I created. There were so many points along the way, and I don't know why it just did that. There were so many points along the way that I actually had to break them up into before they went to the police station to be interviewed. So we're going to look at those first because we're just going to this is so sensitive. We are just going to go chronologically through her day and break it down. And what I did was I took notes from the FOIA docs from different places and just dropped them in here. All right, so it starts down here at the house. So her adventure started at 7:49 in the morning, and it said in the docs at roughly 7:49 the GPS locations begin to describe a path away from the residence, taking Mesquite Grove Way to East Leo Place and then onto Gilbert Road. So that was just through here. Now, this isn't particularly interesting, but it kind of will be a little bit later on, just because, just kind of take note that this is the most efficient path to Gilbert Road. And this here is Gilbert Road. So this is where everything started. Now, at 7:49, so right as Lori was leaving, Lori texts her niece, Melanie Boudreau. Laura, and the FOIA doc said Lori sent Melanie, and then that was just her last name, Boudreau, an SMS message to, and this was probably just Melanie's phone. There is no record of this message in the iCloud account, but Lori's phone records captured this communication. So I thought that was notable that before Lori even gets on the road, Charles is in the house. He has most likely already been shot. I personally believe that there was no fight between Lori and Charles. I think Charles would have been significantly afraid as soon as he saw Alex's truck in the driveway. And he did text Adam, Lori's brother, letting him know that Alex was there. And Charles also knew Alex's history of assault with Joe. And I mentioned this in a live, but just a little more than a week before Charles was shot, he and Lori were having a fight. It might have been about 2 weeks, but very shortly before he was shot, they were going at each other back and forth. And then Lori replied to Charles, "Okay, Joe Ryan." And I think, and I already made this point in another line, but I think that would have been a shot across the bow. And I also believe that Charles knew what Lori was capable of. So I'm not going to go back over, the history of our vacation together and some of my concerns with Adam's statements when he finally talked to Chandler Police. You can check out the first video that I did on this YouTube channel about Adam to learn more. But so I think that Charles was very afraid before he even stepped in the house. So I just don't think he would have has been hanging out. We know that he got there just shortly after 7:30, and then Lori didn't leave until 7:49. So most likely, Charles was just lying on the floor, bleeding out. And the first thing that Lori does is on her way out, she texts Melanie. So we don't know what she texted her, but anyway, okay. So, and I numbered these just so that it's kind of easy to follow along. So Lori comes out to Gilbert Road, and her first stop, and they place her here at 7:50. So it only took her a minute to get there. And again, they place Charles' device. So I don't want to have to keep qualifying that, but they did confirm some of these stops, like the Burger King and the Walgreens, with surveillance footage. So anyway, so she stops at Burger King to get breakfast, and it says from roughly 7:50, the GPS data skips ahead roughly 7:55 when the data indicates the location as being in the same complex as the Burger King store this was redacted, but this was the closest Burger King, and it was on the way, and my this address fit in the redaction. Okay, so let's see here. Multiple GPS location events logged at that area between 7:55 and 7:56. This was generally consistent with the video from the Burger King, which appeared to capture Lori Vallow in the rental Kia traveling through the drive-thru at that location at the time marker 7:54 on that day. Refer to that video for details. Now, while she was there, so we know that she arrived roughly 7:50 and was captured on video at 7:54 in the drive-thru. So what I did was I just tried to find any references to times on that day and kind of injected them into the storyline. So at 7:52, so while she's waiting at the Burger King, most likely in line, Alex calls. So it said Alex called Lori's cell phone. Per Lori's records, the call lasted for 49 seconds. So there was some kind of update. All right, then we move up Gilbert Road. She was, the GPS captured this location at Gilbert, and I think this is like State Road 202, something like that. The next logged event at roughly 8:02 was near the intersection of Gilbert Road and the Santan Loop 202. Now, at that same time, and if I found something in the FOIA docs like elsewhere, then I kind of put this subtitle in here just to form somewhat of a demarcation between just, the narrative from this, time, I don't know, kind of move by move narrative and other places in the FOIA docs. So in between the two calls between Lori and Alex, Lori and Melanie, again, this is her niece Melanie, exchanged 4 more SMS messages that were on the phone records, but not on the iCloud records. So Lori deleted these text messages from her iCloud, but her phone recorded that there were messages back and forth between Melanie and Lori. So clearly Melanie is a key player on this day. At least we know that Lori was in contact with her very early on. We don't know what for. Okay, the next GPS location was at Gilbert and Chandler. Says then at 8:05, there were 2 events near the intersection of Gilbert Road and Chandler Boulevard. Now, at this time, so this was captured at 8:05. Well, it was right around this time at 8:06, Alex called Lori the second time. So we know that the text messages between Lori and Melanie were between the two calls from Alex. And Alex first called her when she was at the Burger King. So it says Alex called Lori's cell phone. Per Lori's records, the call lasted for 56 seconds. So both of these calls were very short. They were some kind of update or a question or something. So then Lori went to this Walgreens. So at roughly 8:08, a GPS event indicated the phone was at the northeast corner of Lindsay Road and Williams Field Road. That complex included a Walgreens store and it redacted the address. Detective Yinklin later recovered video from that store, which appeared to show Lori Vallow parking the Kia in the parking lot and approaching the doors before getting back in and leaving. Online records indicate that particular store did not open until 9 o'clock. So first, Lori goes to this Walgreens, and again, I was able to put this together because they're redacting the address, but they told us where it was, so that was not a stretch. And and I will share this map at the end, but you can verify everything, of course. So she goes to another Walgreens. So this is at 8:08. Now, JJ's school started at 8:30. And she would have most likely passed JJ's school, which was right here, to get to this other Walgreens. So it is curious to me that she didn't just drop JJ off and then go to the Walgreens. Like this one, I can kind of understand because maybe there's, I'm sure there's some kind of minimum time you can't drop your child off before that time. But clearly after 8:08, she probably would have gotten there about, 8:13, something like that. And for a school that started at 8:30, seems like she would have been able to drop JJ off. So I just think it's curious. I don't have any insight into it, but she then went up to this Walgreens. She got there at 8:15. It says the next logged location was at 8:15 at an area on Warner Road and Cooper. There were multiple logged events between 8:15 and 8:18 in the general area of the Walgreens store located at Cooper and Warner. Just a second. Now, this is a mystery within a mystery. So okay, so she bought sandals. We already knew that. It says Lori arrives at Walgreens, yada, yada, where she purchases 2 pairs of sandals. And we'll talk more about that. But also at this same time, Lori, and I forgot to capture the time for this, but Lori texted her friend Audrey. Now, Audrey, if you've been following the case, Audrey was one of the few people who in Chad's proclivity to rate people according to these either light or dark scales or trust levels, she was rated a 100 out of 100 trust level. At least I could say there was an Audrey who was rated 100 out of 100. She also has a background in herbology, which I think is interesting because I'm not in any way, but this is all just trying to put facts together. I am not the judge, jury, or executioner in this case. I just think it's interesting given the fact that Lori had this fascination with in particular, she had a fascination with malachite. She picked out malachite rings in the spring and sent her niece Melanie screenshots of them Then she ordered a malachite ring. That person wasn't able to fulfill the order because he was busy. And then she ultimately ordered malachite rings. And both her wedding ring and Chad's wedding ring were malachite. So she did seem to have this fascination with malachite. Ian Pulaski also talked about malachite and it having healing properties. I think also Melanie, her niece, made a reference to malachite. So the fact that this Audrey person has this background, this certification in something to do with herbs, I just think it's interesting. But anyway, so she was important enough to Lori that Lori sent her a text. There is, again, no content on the iCloud account, but the communication was captured. Okay, so now let's talk about these sandals. So one thing that was interesting to me, and I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit here. Let me pull this up here. So I had noticed, I'm going to make this full screen. So I had noticed in the body cam footage that Lori had a pair of sandals on. They're a pair of flip-flops. And it appears that they don't fit her. And also when she's being interviewed in the Chandler police station, I thought it was interesting that when Detective Yinklin was in there, like Lori took the flip-flops off and sat Indian style. So I wondered if she was trying to draw attention away from the fact that for some reason she was wearing flip-flops that didn't fit. So I think a lot of us kind of assumed that this was a, a pair of flip-flops that she had bought and also Tylee's. However, I don't think that that is the case now. But before I get into that, I also want to note that there was a pair of flip-flops just kind of like haphazardly placed in front of the steps. Now, this would be pretty unusual for Lori, and from the time I first saw it, it just seemed staged. I also found out in the FOIA docs, I found confirmation that this was Charles' hat, and I had made that case in the last live, I think it was. Yeah. So I just yesterday just came across something that referenced Charles baseball cap. So I thought it was weird that Charles' body was like way over here and his hat is placed here. And it seemed a bit contrived, and I wondered if they just removed Charles' hat after he was shot to somehow support this story that there had been a scuffle. But then it doesn't make sense. Why is this like pair of flip-flops just sitting here? So I think it's interesting that they're clearly worn. But then here is Lori with a pair of flip-flops that don't fit her. However, it says, well, anyway, I won't read all of this. You can read it on your own, but it said here, so she was at register 2. It says the feed, yada, yada, started as a time marker 8:19 and showed a person whom appeared to be Lori Vallow paying at a register. This was register 2 for 2 pair of brightly colored sandals. One pair was yellow and green and patterned, and the other pair was black and white striped pattern that may have also had another color to it. Lori paid for the sandals with cash in the video. In that video, she appears to be wearing sandals as well. So that is, and it also says the feed showed a person who appeared to be Lori Vallow exiting the store with what appeared to be the sandals in her hands. So that is very mysterious to me because neither of them is wearing a pair of brightly colored sandals. And the fact that she took JJ, and JJ was that would have been a little more work. So I had always kind of assumed that she dropped JJ off and then went to the Walgreens. And I also didn't remember that she went to a different Walgreens and then that wasn't open. So it makes me wonder if one of the pair of sandals was actually for JJ, if maybe he, like in running, maybe he ran through blood. I don't know, but neither of them are wearing a pair of sandals that match the description. And even if one of the pair was for JJ, that's still, leaves the question, what was the other pair for? So it's very odd. You left your estranged husband on the floor, and it yeah, anyway. And then you're just like going and picking up random sandals. So I do not know. It is a mystery. Okay, so back to the map. So that was the Walgreens. Then from 8:24 to 8:32, she was at Life Academy. All right. So at 8:24, Lori drops JJ off at school. At 8:32, there was an event logged in the area of, and it was redacted. As consistent with Lori Vallow's claim, she took her son there to drop him off for school. Now, at this time, or around this same time, either like right as she was leaving or while she was still there, that was when Alex finally called 911. So Alex calls 911, stating that he shot his brother-in-law in self-defense. He indicated that this shooting took place a couple minutes before the call. According to Lori's testimony, Charles would have laid dead for 43 minutes before Alex called the police. Okay, I just left the grammar error in there. All right, so this is when Alex calls police, and now we will see Lori start to make her way back to the house. So 8:35, she's at Gilbert and Galveston, and at 8:38, she's back at Gilbert Road and State Road 202. And 8:47, she's at Gilbert and Leo. And then at 8:40, yes, 8:48, she's back at the house. So it says at about 8:47. Oh, somewhere else it said 8:48. But anyway, at about 8:47, the next location logged was at or near the intersection of Leo and Gilbert, after which multiple events indicated the phone was at or near 5531 South Four Peaks. This is corroborated by the officer's body-worn camera video, which timestamped the first appearance. Oh, yeah, the first appearance of Lori Vallow at the scene at or about 8:48. The phone mapped at that location. The phone mapped at that location numerous times between 8:48 and 12:10 that day. Okay, so that was when Lori came to the house, and then they were all taken eventually to the police station to be interviewed. So I'm going to turn now. I'm going to turn on the next set of locations. So, whoops. Zoom out. Okay, so post interview, the GPS picks up at 12:27. So we know that Chandler police dropped Lori, Alex, and Tylee off at the house. And then we're left to assume that Lori took her car and Alex took his truck. Most likely they went together. No, there's no evidence of this, but it is unusual that I mean, not so much if Alex is with them. But the first place that at least we know that Charles' phone was at the Santan Village Marketplace. It says there was a skip from roughly German and Val Vista. Oh, now one thing that was interesting before I get into that, this time when Lori left, instead of taking the most efficient route up to Gilbert Road and going that way, she like took these back roads. So I thought that was interesting. That I mean, I'm not going to completely retrace her steps, but who knows? Now they might have had police blocking the way. There might be another reason for that. We did see that there was they did have a blockade, but I just thought it was potentially interesting that she like kind of went this more back roads route. But and if you want to go step by step through it, I'll be sharing the PDF of that part of the police report as well as the map. So knock yourself out. But we know that at 12:27, the GPS pings at the Santan Village Marketplace. It says there was a skip from roughly German and Val Vista to the appearance of numerous GPS locations in the area of Market Street and Santan Village Parkway, a shopping center area. This cluster starts at about 12:27, and a large number were clustered between the Habit Burger Grill. So we know that Alex was hungry for tacos after Tylee was buried. Excuse me. So and this would have been around lunchtime. So I don't know if they got burgers there or what, but it says a large number were clustered between the Habit Burger Grill and an animal hospital to the south. The trail led away from this general area around 12:43. So they were here, for a little under 20 minutes. And then it says the trail followed a path that can be roughly summarized as follows. And they, go through these directions here. And the next location that is actually listed is this cluster here. So this was at 1 o'clock, a little after 1:01. Says there was a cluster of captures from roughly 13:01 hours to roughly 13:15 that were in the area of the Walgreens. So this was a different Walgreens on Ocotillo Road, I guess it's called, but also captured locations closer to the area of the Shell Corner Store and Neater's Bakery complex just west of that. So if we zoom in here, for some reason, the GPS pinged here, and then it pinged over here. So anything that was mentioned in kind of a supplemental way, I added those to a different layer. So those are these like blue stars. So there are no notes because it's just, noting that, like each of the locations that the FOIA docs mention. So I don't know, she may have been getting gas, or someone may have been getting gas, or they could have been searching for like some place to dump something. We just don't know. But all we know is that they were here after already hanging out at another shopping center they were here for almost 15 minutes. So I did wonder if something was dumped in either of these two locations. All right. So from there, then they go east on this road here, and the GPS captures them at Ocotillo and I guess Gansel. I'm estimating 117, just kind of splitting the difference. And that's why I have that tilde. That means approximately. I'm really just splitting the difference between 115 and the next one, which is 126. So somewhere between those two times. Oh, yeah. At about 115 to 119, the GPS moved, indicating a path roughly as follows: east on Ocotillo Road, south on Gansel Road, east on Pecan Creek Road, east on Sherry Street. Now, the Sherry Street, that was mystifying to me, except I found elsewhere in the FOIA doc, and I forgot to include it in the presentation. I'll try to remember to add it in there. But excuse me. Here it's well, okay. I'll just read this. So, I mean, spoiler alert. Alex's house was on the 1600 block of East Sherry Street. And I did actually confirm. Someone looked it up and found the exact address. So he lived somewhere on this street here. It says at so they arrived there at 126, and they were there, or at least Charles' phone was there from 126 until 242. So it says then at about 126 until about 242, numerous GPS locations were captured in the area of the 1600 block of East Sherry Street. I have been told that Alex Cox's residence was in that area, but do not know the exact address. And I just copied and pasted from the FOIA doc. I didn't clean it up. So I left all of the typos and stuff in there. But I was like, okay, so what happened? One thing I couldn't find was what time Alex went back to the house. Had he already worked with the police? But we know that at some point that Alex went back to the police called and asked Alex to come back to the house to walk them through his story and actually on location. So at 2:00, and I found this elsewhere in the police report, someone from Chandler Police called Lori and Alex. So it says at approximately 1400 hours, I was contacted via telephone by Detective Coons, who indicated he and Detective Duncan had discovered a defect in the floor that was concerning. So this is when they discovered that Alex lied about Charles standing for both shots. So they saw the scarring in the wood floor when they moved Charles' body and cleaned up the pool of blood, and it proved that Alex had lied about that. So that's just kind of the backstory there. I go into a lot of detail about that in the last slide. I advised Detective Moffat of the discovery, and he and I responded back to the location. I contacted Lori and her brother via telephone, attempting to reach both to request they come back to the residence. Neither answered their phones, but I left messages on both phones. I entered the residence, and Detective Duncan pointed out a defect in the wood floor for the living room. The body of the deceased had been removed already prior to my arrival. I observed a defect in the floor that appeared to be consistent with damage from a bullet strike. Detective Duncan and Detective Coons both pointed out damage to the baseboard along the wall from the door. While at the location, Lori arrived back at the location with her brother and Tylee. I inquired to Lori about the phone belonging to the deceased as it had not been recovered in the house, and she stated they had it, that they found it in the car. I asked for the phone, and Tylee, who was sitting in the front seat of the car, immediately retrieved it and handed it to me. When asked about the passcodes, both Lori and Tylee stated it was, and it was redacted, and that was his meaning Charles, usual password for things. Lori's brother was staying at the residence to assist detectives, so Lori requested to leave with Tylee to pick up her young son, JJ, which she did. I later observed the removal of the piece of baseboard. This was the baseboard that had the bullet stuck in it, and piece of floor for evidence, and then I left the location. So let's unpack this. So we know that the phone was at Alex's house and they were just chilling for an hour and 15 minutes. But somewhere a little after 2, police called Lori. And well, they attempted to call Lori and Alex, and they left messages for both of them asking them to come back to the house. Now, we don't know exactly what time, but it was probably pretty soon thereafter, because it sounds like he was contacted at 2, and then went back to the location and contacted Lori and Alex. But although we don't know exactly what time it was, Lori does something very unusual. And we don't know if Alex was also with her, but it stands to reason that he would have been, because they arrived at the house together. But Alex stayed, Lori left. So it looks like they would have most likely taken separate cars. But so the phone is on the move again, and this is where it gets very strange. I mean, it's all strange, but this is where it gets really strange. So the GPS picks them up at Combs and Gansel at 2:45. So this was just a couple minutes after they left. At about 2:43 hours, the log locations begin to describe a path that can be roughly summarized as follows. And these were the roads that they went on, and then from 14:45, so 2:45 to 2:47, the location skipped from the area of Combs and Gansel to the area of a medical complex on Gansel Road north of Algarve Place, something like that. The time spent in that location is short, with the locations picking up at 14:49. So for some reason, instead of just going right back to the house, they go down to this medical complex. And this is what I find incredibly suspicious. So this medical complex, like let's see, I am going to first open up the aerial view. I'm glad I dropped these links in here now. So they were coming down Gansel, and this is the medical complex, and you can tell. I mean, it's not remote, but it's more remote than most. Like most of the areas kind of look like this. There are these developments. I mean, it's the burbs. But then they go down to this medical complex. Obviously, neither of them would have had a doctor's appointment. And the only thing in this medical complex is like, orthodontist, chiropractor, it's like places like that. So it really doesn't make sense. Let me just refresh here. It really doesn't make sense why they are here. So, okay. So I used the Google Street View and just kind of like drove through the area. And what I was looking for, I mean, this is the medical complex, but this is what I was looking for. I was like, you know what? I strongly suspect. I mean, so this is where they would have most likely come in. So I was just kind of like poking around in here, as if I was driving through and just looking for some. I'm going to just refresh the page, and this wasn't the only dumpster. In fact, let me just open this again because I ended up kind of going around. But this was one of two dumpsters that I found. Also, it appears that this area has like experienced kind of recent growth. So I don't know how. Like I was trying to find out, like even the the plans for the area, and when some of these businesses open. The entire like medical complex opened in 2010, but it's been developing. But I strongly suspect that they got the call from Chandler. And of course, I mean, like it just is not reasonable that they wouldn't have picked up their phones, especially if this had been, an act of self defense. Lori had nothing to hide. Why would neither of them pick up the phone when police are trying to get a hold of you? But then the fact that they come to this medical complex and then make their way back to the house is extremely sketch. But I just suspect that something was dumped in these dumpsters. So I mean, obviously, if you can think of another reason why they would have, stopped off down here when they needed to be going across here, please, throw that out. This is all open for discussion, of course. Okay, so then after stopping by here, now also keep in mind that Alex would have been aware of this area because he lived here, and Summer lives up here. And I know that because this wasn't redacted. It was in the FOIA docs. They just like listed what block she was on. So she was here. Alex lived over here. And when I visited Lori and Charles, they lived over here in Queen Creek. So they were all familiar with this area. All right. So after heading north on Ganswell Road, Lori's GPS skips to the area of Combs Road, just east of Rittenhouse Road, at about 251. Then it picks them up at 254 at Briggs, and then the next one is at Gilbert and Riggs. There wasn't a time given. And then they made it back to the house at 3:11. It says at about 15:11 hours, a cluster of locations were logged at or near 5311 South Four Peaks. At about 3:23 hours was the last logged GPS event at that location. This is when Detective Yanklin asked Lori for Charles' phone. That was my note that I added. I should probably make that separate. So this was when Detective Yanklin came up to the phone, I'm assuming. But the next two events were close to Chandler Police Department. So one was at 5:10. There was a break until about 17:10 hours when a cluster of 4 GPS events were logged in an area near the intersection of Nevada and Corporate in Chandler. And then this was the last one at 6:23. The next and final 2 GPS events found were just north of the intersection of Chandler Boulevard and Arizona Avenue at about 623. And I'm just noting this as where Chandler Police Department is. And also there was a note later in the FOIA docs that the phone wasn't put in airplane mode. And I guess they're supposed to, there was a note about how they're supposed to put it in airplane mode so that they don't add additional events. It's pretty obvious that's what happened here. And we do know that the phone wasn't put in airplane mode. The one other thing that was very interesting to me, and not in a good way, is that the phone, what a Charles phone, excuse me, wasn't unlocked and access like downloaded until that's when they got all of this GPS data and stuff, not until August of 2020. And so that was more than a year after his death. So anyway, okay, let me see if there was anything else. Oh, yeah. So Lori, Tylee, and Alex come back to the house, and then it says, let's see. Well, I'll just read the whole thing. After completing my interview with Alex, Detective Yinklin and I drove. No. I'm going to start at the second paragraph. That was just for context. While still on scene at the residence of Four Peaks, we had Alex Cox return to the residence to do a walkthrough of the event. The walkthrough was recorded on the evidence.com app, but for an unknown reason, the video footage was only captured for 8 seconds. So there's no video of this walkthrough. And I really want, and I've made this point before, I'm not anti-blue. I'm very appreciative of what police, well, all first responders do. Like, as an analyst, my life isn't ever on the line. Like, data isn't going to kill me. These people, they put their lives on the line, potentially day after day after day. So I really have the highest respect for law enforcement. I feel like I have to kind of qualify that given where I live. So, but at the same time, I did another live about the many missteps in this investigation. And so I'm just not inclined to give them too much of the benefit of the doubt, because typically when you have a device that captures video, there's some kind of visual indicator that the video has stopped. Anything could happen. This is technology, but yeah, so there's no video of this walkthrough. And the other reason why I'm just not inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt was that, and I already went through this in the live about, why wasn't Alex Cox arrested, is that the police report very simply says that the evidence at the scene of the crime, they didn't call it a crime scene, but in the room where Charles was shot, aligned with Alex's testimony. And they did have Alex draw a diagram. The diagram isn't included. If it is, it's redacted from the police report. But I walked through just some of the really disturbing signs from the room, like the round or the bullet just looks like it's unspent and it's just sitting in the middle of the room and had blood on it. But the whole scene looks very contrived. There's no blood anywhere to be found anywhere in this room. So I suspect that there was plenty of blood, and that Lori helped Alex clean up because she didn't leave until 7:49. So if Charles had been shot right away, that would have given them some time. Now, I'm sure it was also a very chaotic scene, but I mean, I zoomed in and panned that room, and I mean, even where the bullet was lying, it said it was 3 to 4 feet from Charles. Like, there's not even a trail of blood where, I mean, like, there's no blood around the bullet. Anyway, so the fact that there's no video, I just, yeah. But anyway, so for an unknown reason, the video footage only captured 8 seconds. Present during the interview with Alex was myself, Detective Coons, Detective Werther, and Detective Duncan. During the walkthrough, Alex gave a statement consistent with what he had told me during his interview and put himself in the area of the hallway facing northeast at the time he shot Charles, etc., etc. So, let's see. Yeah, I'll just keep reading. Alex said he shot Charles twice as he was standing. Alex said again after he shot Charles, he went to the sink and washed his hands. He went to the room he stayed in the night before to put the gun down, and he then called 911. Alex was released from the scene. When we finished processing the scene, we secured the house as Lori and Alex were not back at the residence. Okay. So I already talked about, they called somewhere around 2, and yeah, I already went through that. Okay, so this is just what I did was I just copied and pasted this into the map so that if someone opens up the map but they don't have the presentation, it's all there. All right. As always, if you want to access the presentation, it is at bit.ly/Lori's steps. So Lori's -steps. And the map is at bit.ly/murder map. So I use these bit.ly links just because it makes it really easy to go right to that link, even if you don't open up the presentation. Okay. So now we will open it up for Q&A. All right. Okay, so if you have a question, please just put the word question in all caps. Also, please don't write like a paragraph of a question. I'll just skip over it. For the first few lives, we were getting questions that were off topic. So I do now read the question before I read it out loud and answer it. So if it's really long, I'm just not going to do that. Having said that, I do review the chat after these lives. Sometimes there are interesting points that people make, and I'll go into Cool Cats and maybe discuss them there, or take note and address them in a future live. Also, if you asked a question earlier in the live, you might want to ask it again, because typically I don't make it back to the beginning of the live. Okay. But this live didn't go as long as they usually do. And now that I have like a lot of the really big kind of thick and chewy topics that I just didn't, there weren't natural breakoffs for them. And I didn't want it to be like, to be continued, like a show from like the 70s and 80s. So I thought, well, and they're long, but they're like basically 5 to 7 podcasts in one, so you can pace yourself. We're all adults, but I hope that future lives will be much more like kind of topic focused like this one. Okay, so Cheryl asked, do you think she bought the sandals for JJ? I do suspect that one of the pair of sandals was for JJ. So, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's the possibility, I've just like thought through all of the different options. There's the possibility that Lori had medicated JJ and he may have been asleep in the car. Um, so she might have bought two pairs of sandals, like two different sizes, and and she was pretty short on time. School was about to start, so that's the best thing that I can think of. I just don't know. But I do suspect that the sandals were bought because the original shoes had blood on them. Alternatively, someone may have carried JJ to the car, like Alex might have carried JJ to the car. I do not believe the story that JJ was in the car and Tylee went out and all of that. I've already talked about that in another live, but JJ was a runner. He would not have been able to be left awake in a car and even asleep, because I remember looking up the weather at that time. And at that time, I mean, this was July, and temps were already around 90 degrees at that point in the morning. So, for JJ to have just been left in the car, I just don't think that that's believable. But so, yeah. So, okay. Didn't Adam Cox say Lori had Charles' phone for several days? Did Charles have more than one phone? No, I don't think that Adam said that. But yeah, she had his phone for several hours and was going through his phone, and that's how she saw the interactions between Charles and Adam. Okay. You're welcome, Cheryl. Anytime I see familiar names from Cool Cats, you're going to get to the front of the line. Jean said, I think 3 sets of flip-flops were bought. One for her and Tylee for sure. No, 2 pair of sandals were bought. But Lori, like I said in the presentation, Lori and Tylee are not wearing sandals that fit the description. Okay. Okay. I heard the Bethy Boop said, I heard today that district attorney for Chandler area messed up a lot of cases in 2020 that can't be prosecuted anyway to verify this. Google. Yeah, I haven't heard that. Question, why do you think, well, I said I was going to pre-read the question. Okay. Why do you think the sandals she was wearing were too big? Could they have been Charles? They were actually too small. Her, Lori's toes were peeking out over the edge of the sandals. So I don't know. Okay. The Great Canadian Beaver. I'm not sure with your question. It says, did they take the bat as evidence? If not, why not? So if you mean they, by they, if you mean Chandler police, yes, and they did. So they didn't run tests on it for 2 months. I don't know how normal that is, but yeah. Um, uh, they found fingerprints, two two fingerprints or two sets of fingerprints on like the wider part of the bat, and it said that they were inconclusive, so they didn't match Charles. I went over that in another live, but yes, Chandler did take the bat. It just didn't have any evidentiary value. And it sounds better to say the results were inconclusive rather than Charles' fingerprints weren't on the bat. Again, I want to be fair, but this investigation, yeah. Anyway, okay, so Fuzzy Doxy asked a pretty common question. They asked, what was the name of the ex-police officer that the group knew? Do you think he influenced the reporting officer? So that was Jason Mao. Jason was in this group. He's a very interesting character. By interesting, I mean pathetic. I mean, like, yeah, he's just like the proverbial coward guy, like trying to be this big tough guy. But he's a royal dork. Like, he refers to himself as Mr. Jason, like when talking about his interactions with teenagers. And, he's like, well, gee, Mr. Jason. And he talks about how, like, in one of his talks that he did, like, he was really into the whole warrior thing. He really thought himself a warrior. And he talked about how, like, he loved the, like, good old fashioned rock'em sock'em police work. And I'm just like, who says rock'em sock'em? Like, after like 1976, And so it's like he, acts like big man on campus, but he's just a dork. So having said that, I'm going to go a little one against the wind on this. I know that a lot of people do believe that he influenced this. I actually don't. The reason, and none of us know for sure, but the reason I think he didn't was that when the FBI joined the case, so that was the first week in December of 2019. One of the first things they did was download all of these podcasts, and one of the agents was assigned this task of looking into Jason Mao. So one of the things that he did in this investigation was he reached out to Jason's supervisor from when he was working for Chandler Police. And that supervisor said that he remembered Jason because they were on location serving a search warrant, and Jason was supposed to be doing lookout. And when they got back to the car, he was asleep, so the others were on location, actually risking their lives. And Jason is, according to his supervisor, was asleep on the job. So, I mean, one incident does not a pattern make, but just the fact that this this supervisor just didn't seem to have a lot of respect for Jason. And I know that there have been rumors that Jason was being investigated for sloppy police work, and he resigned before being fired. I can't confirm that, and I really have a deplorable lack of curiosity about Jason. I think Jason was an interesting player earlier on. He was involved when Lori and Melanie Gibb went to the police station in in January. And then he also played this like little pissy passive aggressive role of like at different junctures when really serious things were happening, like right after Charles was shot and killed. He had a Facebook post about, about a Jeep Wrangler and looking for a guy. And then there was a post about a miter saw, and there was a post about, and there were just all these like stupid kind of passive aggressive posts that just happened to correlate with key events that were happening kind of earlier on in this murder spree. So it seemed like he was kind of more like, I have a secret. And he, if, like as an analyst, we always say, correlation does not mean causation. So just because two things happened at the same time doesn't mean that one caused the other. So, just because Charles was shot and killed and owned a Jeep Wrangler, and then I think it was the next day, Jason posted about a Jeep Wrangler, doesn't mean that they're related. But when you have a number of these social media posts, it starts to appear much more like an actual causation. I'm not saying that they are, but all that to say, I just don't see evidence that he would have carried influence. It's possible, as in like all things are possible. I just personally, though I did entertain this theory earlier on, I eventually kind of fell more on the side of not probable. He was interviewed by Rexburg police when they came to Phoenix, and he did willingly submit to a buccal swab, to have his DNA tested. So yeah, we don't know how much he was involved. We do know that he was quite taken with Lori. So, after all of this became public, he really tried to distance himself from Chad and Lori, but he, there's a recording of him talking about when he first met Lori, and it's ridiculous. He sounds like a little boy with a crush, and so yeah. So I suspect that this, I don't know what could have caused this investigation to be treated so irresponsibly, in my opinion. But I just wonder if there was a pressure to close cases, and you just Detective Moffat was the lead investigator. I'm sure he never had any idea that this case could come back to bite him as badly as it has. And he was removed from the case, but he was promoted, but he was removed from the case. So, yeah, so I really just don't know. I mean, it's, because I did an entire presentation of what I believe were quite a few indicators that they did have probable cause to arrest Alex at minimum, and really both Alex and Lori. I was just trying to appear reasonable. I think they had plenty of cause to arrest them, but at least to detain them and question them further. And even, like time and time again, like Lori just keeps getting this pass, so she leaves the scene, and with her husband like bleeding out, and takes JJ to school, after like, going to Burger King and Walgreens. Now we know that there were two Walgreens, and then there was a third Walgreens, which we don't even know, but that was after that she was interviewed. But I mean, it's like she's running errands, so it's not like she even just took JJ to school and came right back. But then, they all come back to the house because they were all requested to come to the house. And then Lori's like, "Hey, you know what? I need to go. I have to pick up JJ." Like, it's the same thing with Melanie, then Boudreaux. Like, she was interviewed. Um, this was after Brandon was shot at, and she brought her 2-year-old with her. And so they're interviewing her with, I'm assuming, like a 2-year-old sitting on her lap. So she would have had to be careful about what she said. And there's no record that they brought her back, So Lori goes and, says she has to pick up JJ. No, she already said in her interviews that all of her family lived in Phoenix. Like, that's why she didn't want to, this is why she had such a big issue with Charles, taking them to Texas, because all of her family was in Phoenix. So it's just like, why didn't anyone say, well, have a family member pick him up, or we need you to, figure this out and, come back to the house by this time? But they're like, oh, okay. You need to drop your son off at school. Oh, okay. Well, she had to drop her son off. Oh, you need to pick your son up. Okay. So then we just won't have Lori also do a walkthrough, and we won't have Tylee do a walkthrough. We'll just have Alex do this walkthrough. So anyway, yeah, if it's off topic, I'm not answering it. Um, Someone's question started with off topic. I'm like, well, thanks for the heads up. All right. Cool question. If this wasn't planned, why were the kids sent to Charles' car? So I don't think, again, I don't think that they were sent there. I think they all left. And we also know that according to Tylee's testimony, Lori sent her back into the house to get her purse, which is weird. But Lori, for some reason, decided to take Charles' car. So I know from having been there, Charles tends to keep his wallet and his valuables in his car. Oh, and we also know that from when his car was moved from the airport, he actually wasn't able to get into, no, what was it? Oh, yeah, he wasn't able to get into the house when he got to the house. So his friend, Gabe Benia, picked him up and brought him back to the house. And he couldn't get into the house because his keys were in his truck. So he would just use the code to get into the truck when he traveled. So I think the whole purpose was for Lori to have the opportunity to dig through all of his stuff, to go through the wallet, because and I played this in another live, but one of the police officers who had the body cam and the body camera uh, and complained that they couldn't find a wallet. So they couldn't find his wallet or a phone. So they didn't even have anything to confirm his identity. So, and also Lori had to return Charles' hotel key. So she had his hotel key as well. So I think it was, probably just to, get access to the money and anything that she could. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Someone said JJ was apparently in the car already when Charles went back into the house for a cell phone. I mean, you can feel free to believe Lori Vallow. I do not believe her. So there's just no way that Charles would have one. It's beyond, yeah, I just don't think it's reasonable for Charles to have put his phone down. And one thing about not just Lori, but the Vallow family, they are not sophisticated liars. Like they have this tendency to really exaggerate because they're so used to getting by on charm, like people just believing them. Um, so yeah, but for Charles to like put his phone down on the counter and then go, like leave JJ in the car. One, I've already made the point that that's just not something Charles would have done. But then to like come back for his phone, it's just outside the realm of anything believable, in my opinion. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to the most current. It looks okay. I'm not finding any more questions. I'll scan a couple more minutes, and if there aren't any, we might get out of here in an hour and a half. Okay. The Great Canadian Beaver asked, strange that none of the neighbors heard the gunshot and called the police. Did the police ever find a silencer? So technically it's a suppressor. No, they didn't. And that was one of the points that I made in the last live where I talked about, why wasn't Alex arrested? The fact that he would have, by his testimony, shot 2 times with this, high power 45, and Lori put herself in the room. Well, just like she said she turned around and she only heard one shot, but we know that Charles was shot twice. So, yeah, so I did a whole like a pretty deep dive into the fact that they were both in the house, and this was and Lori was just like, according to her testimony, she had just turned around, she heard the shot, and she was on the other side of the wall. But this was a house that had no carpet, and in the room, excuse me, where the gun was shot, there was no furniture. The room was surrounded by mirrors, 2 large picture windows. So this sound would have reverberated. And the fact that there were 2 shots and neither of them even like had any problem with hearing, they weren't like grabbing their ears. I just had, when I had a gun, it was just a 22. It was very loud, like, and I took a class in, like, how to shoot a gun, and they really emphasize the importance of having protection. And so anyway, so I'm not going to go into all of that again, but the fact that here you have 2 people in this largely an empty room, not even largely, it was an empty room, and they had no problem hearing the police officers, being questioned. That, I think that should have been a red flag, that they would have had to have had some kind of protection on, which I don't think that that's reasonable, because if Charles had walked into the room and seen, people with uh, protection, like they were at a gun range, that would have been a big red flag, unless he didn't see them. Or Alex used a suppressor. So, yeah, so I made the point of, I think that these investigators should have been suspicious of that. And that was one of the minor things, But yeah, so no, they didn't find a suppressor because they didn't look. Like, they never went to Alex's house. I suspect that when they got the call from police, I suspect that Lori and Alex went in kind of a panic mode. And I think something from getting that call may have made them worried that police were going to come and search his home. They didn't search, I mean, like, they went into the room where Alex, like they looked around the house, but yeah, there's no record of them, like, searching, like, the uh yeah, like dumpsters or anything around these different places where there was a cluster of GPS activity. So, if they did that, it was redacted, but I don't think so. Someone asked, was Jason fired from the police department? No, he resigned from Chandler, and then he moved over to Phoenix Police, where he was apparently had an injury, and was, whatever they call it, like medically discharged or something like that, on disability. Yeah. So uh, the Bethy Boop asked, any idea why Arizona doesn't want to pursue Chad, even though they have audio of him getting estimates on cremation for Charles? That's a really good question. When I first took jobs at unredacting I think it was the affidavit of probable cause. There actually wasn't a title on this document, but it looked like they were recommending that Chad also be charged, and they were. We found out later, but it had said in that same report that they didn't find evidence that he had been involved in the planning of the death. So there was this kind of push me, pull you thing, like, where they're saying, yeah, we just don't see evidence that, I shouldn't assign a tone. Uh, They're stating that there wasn't evidence that Chad was involved in the planning of the shooting, but then they recommended charges. So, again, I I do try to be fair, while at the same time, just kind of looking at this and going, what the heck? Like, what is going on here? So it just seemed to me like they just kicked the can down the road, and then it was on the Maricopa prosecutor or the prosecutor's office to say, we're not going to pursue, um, yeah, Chad. And but it seemed like a foregone conclusion. I mean, like, yeah, that whole thing just seemed like a really weird flex. Like, and in fact, that's why I, like, waffled over, like, because and Chad Daybell fit, but I was just like, but it said that, like, there wasn't evidence that he was involved in the planning. So, yeah. So I don't know. Um, oh, okay. Let's not. This is a good opportunity. I'm not going to point anyone out, but this has happened before in the live where someone has shared some kind of rumor. Please do not do that in the live. Someone shared a rumor about a family member and then later said, well, I hope it's not true. And I know that it can be confusing. Different YouTube lives kind of have different rules. We just don't we just don't do that. So, if you have information that can be verified, absolutely. But we, time people out. If it's a particularly egregious rumor, um, then you will be booted. You'll still be able to watch the videos, but you won't be able to participate in like the chat and stuff. And that's just because it's just really important to me and to the moderator team. I go to pretty great lengths to try to verify information. And if there's something I'm not sure about, or if information comes from, a trusted source who wants to remain confidential, I make that known. So we really try to keep this as above board as possible. So no shame, but yeah, just don't do that. Okay. Someone asked, was Charles ever sympathetic to Joe, or did he believe Lori's narrative? Mm, there, no. Charles and Joe had a very combative. You can't even call it a relationship, and it went both ways. I've seen from the FOIA doc. I've seen um, emails from Joe, and they're in the FOIA docs from Joe and Lori's divorce, as well as Charles and Cheryl's. Um, there was an allegation of Charles hiring two guys to tailgate Joe, and there was another woman who was in the car, and Tylee was in the car as well. And that woman actually reached out to me, and she said it was terrifying. And so I think that they just had a very toxic, relationship. And I think anyone, and you can't put all of this on Lori. Obviously, other people had choices. Um, but I have wondered, we don't know how much Charles knew. He and Lori were married when there was this whole plan to murder Joe and for Alex to put him in his trunk and take him out to the desert, and all of this stuff. So we don't know how much Charles knew, but when Lori threatened to destroy him, and Gabe had said, she said destroy, not kill. So he was a little pedantic. Gabe was the bishop, and he did Charles no favors. But I have always wondered if part of the reason Charles had what would have been to law enforcement what may have appeared to be an exaggerated response. I wonder how much that response was informed by knowing just how dangerous Lori and potentially the Cox family was if you find yourself on the wrong side of the table. So that is tons of conjecture. But yeah, I I do think that, if we don't know exactly how long Lori had planned to get rid of her family. We just know that the first evidence popped up for Idaho in October. We don't even know for Chandler, and we don't know that Joe was murdered because his death was never investigated. But if Lori had been planning to have Charles murdered, she would have had to, and the kids, she would have had to get Joe out of the picture first. So if this was all part of a coordinated plan, I think it would have needed to go down as it did. Like first Joe, then Charles. Because if you think about it, like if Lori had targeted Charles and Joe was around, like if they had put aside their differences, which, people can find the ability to put aside differences when they find themselves on, you know, the target of someone's homicidal rages or whatever. If Charles and Joe had coordinated and become a team, that would have spelled disaster for Lori. Okay. All right. I will take one or two more questions and then we will call it a night. Um, yeah. So Mama D was asking about bloody shoe, bloody like burner phone dump, bloody clothes dump. I do suspect at some point. So I strongly suspect that there was a cleanup effort and that Lori would have taken, whatever they used to clean up, even if it was, just like, a bag with paper towels or, whatever, a mop head. Like she could have thrown that even in a dumpster by the Burger King because, fast food restaurants always have a dumpster. So, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I even wonder about that. The fact that the GPS registered not just at the burger place and the corner, whatever it was, there was like a bakery and stuff, but it also registered at the Walgreens on the east side of the street. I just they didn't, there's no record that they went to that Walgreens. So like there's no record that they like, asked for any video footage or anything like that. Not that I know of. So yeah, it's very curious. But yeah, I've always suspected, even with the fact that some of these locations there were like multiple events, like GPS events. I mean, she could have dumped this suppressor anywhere, even before coming back to the house. Um, and yes, Chris asked, didn't they have a pool party that evening? Yes, they did. Um, Karen asked, was there any evidence of them having a pool party that day in the GPS? Not in the GPS because that the phone had already been turned over. So Charles had GPS turned on, but apparently Lori didn't, or they didn't pull her GPS. We just don't know. But that piece of intel came from the landlord, and apparently neighbors were complaining about this noise. And imagine, like, you're in the burbs. I'm sure there aren't many shootings in this, kind of upper middle class neighborhood. And these people had just moved in. So they had just moved in, and then there was a shooting, and then there's this loud pool party at the same house. So it had to be really weird. And one of the YouTubers, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he interviewed one of the neighbors who lived next door. So she actually heard people at the pool party, and she said it was loud. So, I mean, even just that, the fact that like you have all of these people, we don't know how many, and I don't think, I mean, unless it unless this was a question by the grand jury or something, the only person who has said that they were there was Colby. Um, he claims that his mom told him Charles had a heart attack. But and he wouldn't have gone if he had known Charles had been shot. So yeah, so that's all we know. But someone had left a comment in one of the videos questioning if the purpose of the pool party was to just like get a lot of DNA in the house. And I think that there's a lot of merit to that theory, because when you already know the story, we have confirmation bias, so we can tend to dismiss theories because we know that police didn't ever come back to the house and interview them again. But they didn't know that. They didn't know that, police, that they weren't going to come back with more questions, and we don't even know, there's no record in the police report that police ever confronted Alex about his lying that Charles had been standing for the second shot. So we know that they already knew that, and that was why they knew that Alex lied, and that's why they asked them to come back. But there's no record in the FOIA docs, unless it's redacted. There's no record, and there really wouldn't be any good reason that I can think of to redact that, because they don't really redact much of anything with regard to Alex, because he's dead. So they don't have to protect his privacy. They would have to protect the integrity of the investigation. But they share a lot of details about Alex, and they share that they knew that Alex had lied. But we don't even know if they confronted him. If they did, that would have been cause for concern, and so it would make sense to me that they would want to, Lori and whoever was involved would have wanted to, just compromise the scene as much as possible. So okay, one more question, and then we're going to call it a night. Do you think they threatened Tylee so that she would tell the same story of how Charles died? Absolutely. And I'm not just saying that because Tylee is my niece. I really try very hard to not go in with biases. And I talked about that on my analytics channel, in like when I really took the deep dive into Joe. I addressed the possibility that Tylee could have been used as a lure for Joe to like potentially open his door, because there was evidence that he hadn't seen Tylee in at least a year, possibly longer. And he had all of these like things out, and it looked like he was packing for a trip. And then there was a girl's like duffel bag because it had like different color hearts and stuff like that. So, and the apartment was pretty sparse. So, like why would he have had stuff for a girl, out? But anyway, so, all that's just to make the point that I do try very hard to, look at all of the possibilities as dispassionately as possible. Having said that, yes, I absolutely believe that Tylee was threatened. It the onus of responsibility to keep her mom and Alex out of jail really fell on her. Like they needed her corroborated testimony. I've talked before about like Tylee's body language when they were at the car. Like Tylee just looks very shut down, where Lori's just kind of doing her charm thing and, sorry neighbors and stuff like that. And you would kind of expect, like, with a really traumatizing event like this, that the the child, or in this case a teen, would stick pretty close to the mom, but you see like this distance between them and stuff. And also Tylee has this tendency to self comfort by like kind of holding herself. And I've talked about that, not in any of these lives. I will do a live about Tylee, but anyway. So we also know that according to Melanie Gibb, Lori had already called Tylee a zombie, and that was in the spring of 2019. So that was even before Charles was shot and killed. So I suspect that Lori did threaten her. Tylee also would have been in the car when they stopped at this medical complex. And like I said, there's just no good reason. Like you can't say like, well, there was a Walgreens, so they could have, run in for gum or water or whatever. Oh, there was a burger place. Every other stop had kind of some plausible deniability. A medical complex, no, and there's no good reason. So, and also Tylee would have seen her mom charm her way through all of these different situations, like, and if Joe was murdered, Tylee would have known. Like Lori doesn't have a filter. I've referred multiple times to this one incident when we were on the vacation where Lori talked about something that was just so absurd. It wasn't like criminal or anything like that, but it was just so gross, and it was something that their family had done. And she just did not have a filter. And you see that all through this whole like murderous, rampage. She just kept giving herself away. Um, so I think that Tylee most likely carried a lot. And also even in finding like their Smule accounts. So I did a live just, where I really took a dive into their Smule accounts. And, yeah, there were some disturbing things even in these Smule accounts, like even this song that Lori redid, like she rewrote the words to Hallelujah and, destroyed that song, and she and Tylee were friends on Smule. So I strongly suspect that Tylee saw her mom spinning out and would have been well aware of I believe she would have been well aware of her homicidal, um, you know, uh, ideations and activities, and even just how Lori would just announce that like Charles was dead. And then, according to April, like she updated it and said, well, I suspect to get a call any day. I also shared a screenshot, I think just yesterday in Cool Cats, about like Lori was so confident that I think it was March 8th that either that day or the next day that Charles would be dead. And Alex replied to her, get rid of Ned already. So it appears from March that there was some kind of plan to have Charles murdered, but Alex wasn't the person. It wouldn't really make sense for him to say get rid of Ned already. So yeah, so Tylee would have been aware of all of this, but yes, I think that she was threatened, and there was no one who interviewed her that was like they didn't bring there's no evidence that they brought in like child protection services even after the murder. The only people who ever called in child protection services was JJ's school, and they called in reports 2 different times, but like none of the family members called child protection services. Chandler police didn't call child protection services. There's no evidence after Brandon was shot at. In fact, I just thought of this. uh, I haven't seen any reference to child protection services being called after that attempted shooting. And yeah, so there was no one advocating for Tylee, and I think she knew that. At least it appears there she didn't have an advocate. So and I think there are some parts of the story from July 11th that unless they come out in these trials, we may never know what actually transpired. So, okay, on that note, thank you for joining. Next week, we will do a live Q&A. So if you are a part of Cool Cats, I'll have a post and you can submit questions ahead of time. Otherwise, you can just show up. And unlike these lives where we're following a particular topic, it will be an open Q&A. So any questions that you have, now that doesn't mean I'll be able to answer them, but I will have all of my resources and kind of, fired up, and so I can like search and things like that. So and then if I don't find the answer, if you're not in Cool Cats, you could drop your question in the comments after the live, and I try to respond to like relevant questions and stuff. So so yeah, I do monitor the live for the most part after my moderators kind of take a sweep, just so I don't see all the stupid troll posts. But yeah, so the plan will be to continue this cadence of every other week unless there's something particularly compelling, and then in the off weeks we will do the Q&A. We'll just see if there's an appetite for that. If not, then we'll take that those Friday nights off. So thank you for joining, and good night.